Presidential Info Project presents information about each of the presidents of the United States. And we can use the track bar at the bottom to scroll through the presidents, or we can use next or previous to go linearly one at a time. The data that's presented here is coming from a text file that is delimited with vertical bars. That's the shift backslash. And I use vertical bars because the bio that's presented for some of these likely contains commas, so we don't want to comma delimit it, and may contain tabs. So rather than using those two most common delimiters, I use a different delimiter, and I usually use the vertical bar because it's hardly ever used, or I'll use a very obscure character from the char map. The data is read in from that data file and is placed into a struct or a structure. So in C# we call these structs, and they're kind of like a class in that struct can contain multiple items of different data types. So we have a couple dates here. We can have a Boolean expression. We can have text. We can have a number, an integer, such as the number in terms of the lineage of presidents that each one was. So George Washington, of course, would be number 1. And then John Adams is number 2, Thomas Jefferson is number 3, and so forth. And of course, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president. There's also a little red field that comes up here if they did not complete their term and why they didn't complete their term. So for example, Lincoln was assassinated. There are some who have died in office. Richard Nixon, of course, resigned. So it shows if they didn't complete their term. So that's the project. Let's look at the instructions, and I'll walk you through my code. In this project, we're going to create a custom struct as a data object model, and it's going to model information about each of the U.S. presidents. The record of each president will be placed into a generic list of the struct data model type. We'll simply call it president. The data is found in a text file with each record on a line and the fields of each record delimited by vertical bars. And I did that because the summary probably contains commas and may even contain tabs. So we don't want to delimit the data in that manner. When we open the project, it will start with a title image at the beginning. And then you'll see the different information here that's going to be displayed. There will be a number and a name of the president on top, and then the years in office, party, where they came from, their home state is, their birth, their death, where they were born. And this down here will be a 2 or 3 sentence summary of their term in office. We can navigate through the presidents with a track bar. 0 is going to be this image. 1 would be Washington, 2 would be Adams, 3 would be Jefferson, and so forth. And we can also go previous and next to navigate through the presidents. And I do that because sometimes this little track bar can be a little temperamental if it's too short. I think we can hit all the 47 presidents in this length of this track bar. But it's nice sometimes to give them options of just simply going next if they want to cycle through the presidents, or previous to go back. So there's a display of Thomas Jefferson's information. Again, you can see the bio down here. The birthplace actually takes 2 lines because a couple of presidents have some really long birthplaces that talk about the county they were in, so it doesn't fit on 1 line. So we're going to create a Windows application to show this using WinForms and with C#. Here's the storyboard I presented earlier. Typically, if you're working for a company, they may have a UI UX designer that's going to design the storyboard for you and expect you to basically make it come to life. You're going to follow the designations that they have come up with as far as sizing and placement and colors and those types of things. Some requirements. We're going to create a struct named president. Everything is a string except for the number of the president. That's an integer. So even things like the dates, we're going to treat those as strings. We don't need to do any date manipulation. We're just going to display the information. We're going to create a new resource file, and I'm going to provide a text file as a string resource into that file. So we're not going to read from the local computer or from the cloud. We're going to read from within the application. Since the presidents don't change, we may have to update it every 4 years, but that's okay. Typically, we're going to have a new version come out within 4 years anyway. We're going to read the data, and we're going to create a list of type president. The portraits are all their official portraits from the White House resources, and we will then programmatically display those portraits based on the index number. The previous next buttons simply increment the value of the track bar, so the track bar is coordinating with those previous and next, and we don't need to code in the previous and next to determine which president to show. We simply just change the track bar, and the track bar automatically shows the particular president. And then we will also choose to show if they did not complete their term in red and why. So I give you how to create the list of president. We're going to call it pres. We'll have a method called get presidential data that will read the data into that list when the form loads. An example of the data file. You can see it's delimited by vertical bars. And then here are the presidents that did not complete their term and the reason. That is all in that text file, that data file, but this is a way for you can check to see if each of those is working correctly. And then the grading criteria. I'm going to suggest you pause here, focus on that storyboard first, create your application. You can see my form is 1000 by 675 pixels, and then create all the other controls. And the only thing you really are going to need to code is that loading of the data and the navigation at the bottom. And what's displayed here in the information comes again from that track bar. So that's the focal point of our coding. So pause here, try to do this on your own, and then I will show you my code review. If you want to compare yours, or if you struggle, you can replicate my code. In Visual Studio, I have replicated the storyboard in the form with all the information that's going to be displayed. This image on the left-hand side is 400 by 600 pixels in size. Typically, we want to create our picture boxes, as you've already learned, to correspond to the size of the image that we're actually going to display. The one thing I did want to point out that's not in the storyboard is this label of LBO completed, which shows when the president did not complete their term, has its visibility set to false. If they completed the term, the value is going to be yes, and that's not going to make much sense to the user displaying that. So I keep this hidden until we have a president that did not complete the term, and the reason is what's in the completed field. And so I use a ternary condition to display this or set the value to true as far as the visible if it is not yes. The track bar, the size I have it set as 378 to 45. That's enough to cover the range of 0 to 48, the X value. So we shouldn't have a problem selecting any single president in this trackpad or track bar. In the resources.rex file are all of the images that I imported through the picture box. Note they are named President 0, Pres 00, Pres 01, Pres 02, down through Pres 47. So the names correspond to the number of their term, with 0 being the title. Let's take a look at the code. Here is my struct. Notice that all of the variables are public. That's very important, or you won't be able to access them elsewhere in the program. The first one is an integer, it's the number, everything else is strings, and those correspond to the data coming from the text file. I then created a global variable called presnum, that's the integer value of the index that we're currently working with, or currently displaying. Here's my creation of the global list of type president. I named it pres, equals a new list of type president. In the form, we have our default initialized components, and then I get the presidential data. That's where I'm going to read that information from. So here's my code to read the information. I'm going to clear that list. So anything that was there before is wiped out. We're going to create a string of the resource for my presidential data text file. Now I created a resource called data resources. Let's take a look at that. It contains a string. The string is named presidential data, and it contains all that information that was included in the text file, with each president being on a separate line and those fields being delimited by vertical bars. It's just a copy and paste from the text file into this data resources. That way I don't need to go out and find the data file. It's going to be embedded in the program. Now, one thing to make sure with that data resource file, verify the build action is embedded resource. That should come up by default when you add a resource file, but just verify that. Okay, back to our code. So I'm going to have a string called my data. It's going to be the data resources that we just looked at. I'm going to call the resource manager. I'm going to get the string presidential data. That's going to load that string resource into my data. Then I can split that on the new line character so that each record is going to go into a string array, and I'm going to call it rex. I'm going to skip 0 and 1. Now, why am I doing that? Let's go back to our data resources. Pull this back up. The first record is the title that I gave it in Excel, U.S. Presidents. Then the second record, which would be record 1, is the headers. So I'm going to skip those two files. Starting with record 2 is George Washington. So I have a for loop that goes from I equals 2. I'm going to go to the length of records, and I'm doing a less than, so it's excluding that upper value that doesn't exist. I'm going to increment one at a time. So here's what we're going to do. We're just simply going to read in those records. I'm going to take the record itself, rex element I, I'm going to split it on that vertical bar, and that goes into a string array called fields. I'm going to create a new president object called new pres. And then into that new pres, I'm going to read the data in from each of those fields so that the first field element 0 is the president integer. I'm going to convert that to an integer, then dot parse, and place it into the number variable of our president struct. And then the other records, each of those elements, I'm going to read into the other fields in the order they are in the struct. Finally, I want to add this new pres to my pres list. So pres.add new pres. That will read all the data into our generic list of type president. I create a method called show president. And if the number is 0, that's going to be that index value is 0, we're going to set the portrait to the original portrait of pres00 title. We're going to clear all the fields. I have another method called clear fields we'll look at in a minute that just simply gets rid of everything as far as the data that's being displayed on the right. And then I have a return to exit that method. But if I don't exit, so something other than 0, we're going to display the data from the pres list. We'll set the LBL number label to whatever the num is. That's our index coming from the past argument. And the IDX is going to be one less than that. Remember, our first record is our record 2, which is president 1. And then all we're going to do is take the values from that pres item, pres object in our list, in our generic list, and display the information in the various fields. When we get to the completed field, I'm going to go ahead and put the data in that completed. Most likely for most of the presidents, that's going to be yes. I don't need to display that though. So I have a ternary here of LBO completed dot visible equals the president index, the pres index record dot completed equals yes. So if it equals yes, I'm going to keep that visible set to false. But if it's not yes, so they died in office, they were assassinated, they resigned, it's going to set the visible property to true and display that field, which is the 4 colors set to red. Display the summary, and then we're going to basically get the name of the portrait. That's one of our fields in our data, and I can use that name, use a variable called img name, and I can use the resources.resourcemanager.getObject img name and convert that to an image and display that in the picture portrait. Remember, this is a string as far as the name. It's going to pull up the object, but I need to tell it that, hey, this is an image. So I'm going to convert that to an image before I display it. Here's the clear fields. Pretty straightforward. Just clearing the text to what we originally started with when the application opened. So these are the original properties for each of those controls. And then here's my track bar value changed. It's not much. I'm going to get the value and place that into pres_num. That was my global integer value. And I'm going to call show president with that value of pres_num. All the work of the track bar is actually happening right here. For the previous button, I'm going to make sure it's greater than 0. And if it is, I'm going to decrement it by 1. So I'm decrementing the track pres_num value by 1. That's going to trigger this, which will trigger that show president. Same with the btn next. I'm going to make sure it's not exceeding the maximum value. If it is, I'm going to increment the track pres_num. That's going to trigger the track pres_num value change, which triggers the show president method. That's the code. Not a whole lot to it. The work is really done through that resource of the data being displayed in the show president method. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the C# Xamarin Programming Cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.